Hello, everyone. It's Michael Jacob with Unleashing Intuition Seekers, joined once again by Leo Zagavi. A brand new book out, the Secrets of the Illuminati. Now we have the rise and fall of a Frankish monster, exposing Jeffrey Epstein and the most powerful Jewish sect in the world. Wow, this is a much needed conversation.
Yes, as you know, with volume 12, which you mentioned, the Confessions of the Illuminati series came to an end, at least for the time being. When instead I'm now starting a new series of essays dedicated to topics of interest within, the sectarian realities, often close to the Vatican. And this subject is a very particular one, and I must say also a very challenging one, because as you know, a lot of people have been discussing the Jeffrey Epstein case in the last few years. So, people will be wondering, what is Leo adding to all this? Well, I'm adding a unique perspective, which is digging deep into the ancestry, the family roots of each of the participants. And not only, of course, Jeffrey Epstein, who is Jewish, comes from Europe, of Russian, Ukrainian origins. Podolia, some say, also elements come from Germany, but we have also Ghislaine Maxwell, whose father was known as Robert Maxwell, but in reality his name was completely different. He took the surname Maxwell because he was known as Jan Ludwig Iman Benjamin Ock, and he started working for the British Secret Service, and at that point the leader in the 1930s of the most important network of spies infiltrating communism and subversive groups was called Maxwell Knight, and for that reason he decided to call himself Maxwell and change his surname. So even his surname was a tribute to that. But aside from that, there has been always a lot of discussions now on how did Jeffrey Epstein become Jeffrey Epstein. And nobody gives you a clear answer. Nobody gives you a clear answer, because to have a clear answer, you need to do another kind of investigation. And in the end, you will arrive to the answers, like the Meta Group, which also, by the way, controls IPAC. There's a lot of talk these days about IPAC and so on. But nobody really knows much about the Meta Group, which was founded by people like Leslie Lex Wexner, the guy who, of course, we know him because of Victoria's Secret.
Victoria's Secret, yeah.
But this is a group of very important people, the Mega Group, which they constituted a sort of influential group of Jewish entrepreneurs, which we can consider the modern heirs to groups like the Illuminati. But having said that,
today, Leo, there was an article in the American Conservative, the pro-Israel billionaire behind Jeffrey Epstein, and just like you just mentioned, Les Wexner, who was...
Well, in my book, there is much more,
yeah.
Because in my book, I explain, first of all, who are all these people, their family ancestry. And Lex Wexner founded this group called the Mega Group in 1991, with people like Steven Spielberg, Charles Bronfman, Edgar Bronfman, Max Fisher. When you say all these names, people don't really know their history. So what I do in this book is been actually regarded by journalist colleagues who have had the possibility to already have a look at my book, like Ferruccio Pinotti in Italy, who had conducted some research on the Sabbatean Frankists in connection with the Italian banking system and the very foundations of Italian capitalism. And he was like, Leo, this is really what was missing from the Epstein research on the Epstein case. And when I say Frankist monster, and I put Jeffrey Epstein as being part Dr. Frankenstein, part the monster creature that Dr. Frankenstein created, which we all call, usually referred to as Frankenstein. He never has really a name. Mary Shelley never really gave a name, but we all call him Frankenstein. Frankenstein is itself referred to the Sabbatean Frankist and to Jacob Frank. It was Rabbi Marvin Antelman who described the significance of Frankenstein, which, aside from being based on an alchemist who, of course, did experiments and all that, is actually also based on Jacob Frank. Jacob Frank was, now for all those people who are following me, I want to start from the very beginning, Michael, so we can not confuse our audience with 1,000 names, because, of course, when you read the book, it's over 300 pages and people can go deep into it. But I want to summarize.
True to form, Leo, I was reading the first pages of the first chapter, and the reveal on Israel pedophilia is over the top. We should stop all relations with Israel just on the first couple pages. If people read the first couple pages, like, we got to stop relations with Israel right now. Oh my God.
Yeah, well, but first of all, we need to understand that this book is built on the premises that it doesn't need to be anti-Semitic in any way, or even anti-Israel, because Israel is a reality that can't be simply scrapped off the face of the map. And once you read the whole book and you understand what the Sabbatean Frankists did to the Jewish people, basically forcing them to go to what today we call Israel, we see that the first victims of the whole thing that then developed in terrible acts like the Holocaust, the worst crime ever happened in the history of humanity, is all because of this sect within Judaism. It was, you see, the idea for this book, which is a controversial book, but I had to read it in my head before writing it. I had to actually develop the idea, and it was inspirational for me to have some very dear Jewish friends, people like Roseanne Barr, who introduced me to some other people in Israel, rabbis who came to me and talked to me about their problems within Judaism. And Roseanne Barr told me the worst enemies are the Jews. The worst enemies of the Jews are the Jews. And when she said that, and when she introduced me to the concept of the Erev Rab, which is this group of magicians who followed Moses into the desert, they were the magicians of the Pharaoh who saw the wonders of Moses and said, wow, we need to follow this guy. They were the ones who inspired the worship of the golden calf, which made Moses so crazy he broke down the Ten Commandments and then had to go back up. So here we are talking about first of all, I want to make it very clear for all the people who are watching us. This book is not about taking sides against a race. The enemy is not a specific race. It's a little bit when I wrote books like Volume 12 about the Jesuits. Being against the Jesuits doesn't mean that you are necessarily against all Catholics in the world. Maybe they are the first victims, though, of the Jesuits. The same thing can be said for the Muslims, because most Muslims don't even know that most of their leaders belong to Freemasonry, to other secret societies. And so, for me, it's very important to clear this with your audience, because there is so much anti-Semitism at the moment, so much confusion, so much hate, so much division in our society. And to add to that is not a good thing. So I'm sure that there will be people that will come to me and say, why did you write this book? This book is going to actually help the people who hate Israel or hate the Jews. But when you actually read this book and you understand it, especially the Jews who know very well how I respect their culture, how I respect Judaism, and how I explain how it was infiltrated, manipulated, well, then it's actually a service that I'm making to my Jewish friends here in America, in Israel, and around the world. When there is, because I tend to, see, with the other books, Confessions of an Illuminati, it was my confessions.
Right.
And of course, my experiences. Here, I want to be very careful about what I say, to not be misunderstood for those people who have not read the book yet. This book is challenging. I repeat, is challenging, because when you understand, and this is proven, that the Zionists made a deal with Adolf Hitler called the Transfer Agreement. That is something that people outside of Judaism, outside the Jewish community, know. It took an investigation by a guy called Edwin Black, who wrote a whole book about it. And finally, they understood it was an historical truth. But you understand here, we're talking about the basis of one of the worst tragedies in human history. And the fact that there is organizations like B'nai Brit. B'nai Brit, people say, B'nai Brit is another form of Freemasonry. And it is another form of Freemasonry. And I explain how it was born. And I explain also the compromises they did. I also explain in this book that before the French Revolution, of course, we all know about the Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt. But very few people know there was a secret society built by the Illuminati that opened for the first time the lodges of Freemasonry to the Jews, that became the first Illuminati order controlled by the Sabbatean Frankists. It was actually a direct relative of this Jacob Frank guy. But first of all, just to summarize what this whole thing is, the heresy that we call Sabbatean Frankists, because if we don't explain that, I think that most people here will be like completely confused about the whole thing. Now, within Judaism, there is a belief that you are still expecting a Messiah. They haven't accepted Jesus, so they are still waiting for a Messiah. Okay? Now, in the 17th century, this guy called Sabbatai Zevi declared himself to be the Messiah. And half of the Jews in Europe believed he was the genuine Messiah, until the Sultan, the guy who controlled the Ottoman Empire, forced him to convert to Islam in the year 1666. And most people will think that will be the end of the story. No, that is the beginning of the story, because in 1666, the guy officially converts to Islam, but continues to practice his heresy. His heresy wasn't any kind of heresy. The heresy born out of Shabbatai Zevi, and then a century later by Jacob Frank, who claimed to be his reincarnation, is the sexual magic and all those occult practices that later on people like Aleister Crowley, before him Madame Blavatsky, Eliphas Levi, the guy who invented the word occultism, all these people were connected to the Sabbatean Frankists. And in my book, I show the receipts for these assertions, for this. It's not just, like a conspiracy theory. It's facts proven by historical and academic research, because I am going against the most powerful sect ever, that nobody ever has even the courage to mention in today's world.
Yep.
Because in today's world, Michael,
so many people have gotten shut down. Tucker Carlson, you name it. They mention we need to look at this, and bam, get hammered. So yeah, you're really stepping out with this book. It's going to be good.
Well, it is good, but it's also something that I wanted to do in a way that it will not be possible to debunk. I'm going to show the cover, the full cover of the book here. You can share it on the screen. So you can maybe, here it is. Now, this is, of course, the full cover. It's not only the front cover that you have on the Kindle, but it's also, of course, the back cover that you have on the paperback copy. And as you can see, you have this, which is the temple, which everybody has seen in Little St. James, the small island, the private island that Jeffrey Epstein bought thanks to his connections. This is very important because in my book, I explain how this temple was actually based on a famous Sabbatean Frankist meeting ground, a bathhouse. And this is already, something that starts to be shocking for a lot of people. Like they will think, oh, but this is a really like a direct connection of sorts. Yeah, it's a direct connection. A public bathhouse located in Aleppo, Syria, named Hammam Yalbuga. You go in my book and you can see the pics of the place in Aleppo, which is now an historical place, by the way, and the place built by Jeffrey Epstein, and you see that they are the same. Maybe you can find some reference on the internet about it. But what happens is this bathhouse was meeting ground for one of the most influential communities of the Dome. The Dome were those Muslims, fake Muslims, crypto Jews, who after Sabbatai Zevi had converted, continued as Sabbateans in disguise, but professing outwards the Islamic faith. This is not the first time that the Jews were forced, when they went into an heretical modality, to do that. Previously in history, already the Marranos had done it in Spain when they were persecuted in Spain. But the important thing is here, Frankenstein, because people will tell me, but what is all this Frankenstein nonsense? They will think maybe it's funny. Some people will laugh about it. Oh, Jeffrey Epstein, Frankenstein. I repeat, this is the words of a rabbi. Frankenstein, the whole word has meaning in if you go through the Jewish Kabbalah. And Frankenstein is Frank, like Jacob Frank. It's not a coincidence. So Jeffrey Epstein came from the same area of Europe, prevalently Ashkenazi, but not blaming the Ashkenazi, because in this book I also proved that the first people who actually tried to fight the Sabbatean Frankist heresy were Ashkenazi rabbis. So that already gives you an understanding of the fact that we're not going here against a whole race. We're going against an ideology, a perverted form of religion, a sectarian form of religion. So Frankenstein, that now is also in the cinemas with a new movie that is, Frankenstein has been very popular in the history of cinema. And these days, you know what is the most popular form of COVID? The Frankenstein variant in the last few days, last few weeks, actually. So we have a kind of a synchronicity here of sorts. Jeffrey Epstein was built to be Jeffrey Epstein. He was placed there. In my book, I explain how people like of course, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, and other people of influence, like you mentioned, Les Wexner, of course, is very important. But people don't really know the history of this family. So we have to go first to the history in Eastern Europe, the origins of the Maxwell family, the Hock family, and the Epstein Stolovsky family. Now, these families are from an area that in the 17th and 18th century in Poland, parts of today's Ukraine, because, for example, Robert Maxwell was born in today's Ukraine. Jacob Frank was born in today's Ukraine. But back then, there was a whole region known as Podolia, and in those the regions that were most influenced by the Sabbatean heresy, that later became with Jacob Frank, who claimed to be the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi a century later, is Ukraine, smaller parts of Moldova, Slovakia, Romania, Hungary. And this outbreak of Sabbatianism is very relevant to us, to everybody who is watching us. People talk about the Rothschild. Where do you think the Rothschild come from? The Rothschild family is a product of the Sabbatean Frankist heresy. When Jacob Frank went into Frankfurt, he was received like a king. And that was also the beginning of an alliance with the Rothschild family that then developed all over Europe. And this is like the moment in which, you see, Sabbatai Zevi, of course, converted to Islam. But his successor, Jacob Frank, who was born instead in Ukraine, which at the time was like, I guess, Poland, Podolia, those areas were Catholic, where the areas where actually the Jesuits were ruling. And where they actually ended up when they were persecuted. And Jacob Frank brought 20,000 Jews to convert to the Catholic Church. In exchange, they nobilitated him. And then, initially, he forced his followers to only marry between each other, even if they had converted to the Catholic faith outwards. But when they saw that both the rabbinic authorities, as well as the Inquisition, were with their eyes on them, they had an idea. Let's marry into the most aristocratic Catholic families. And also, they had another way of taking over these families. They will ask a very influential Catholic people to become their godfathers when they will be baptized in the Catholic faith. So they will take their surname. You know what that meant? That meant basically that the elite of Europe, in a very short time, got taken over by the Sabbatean Frankists, places like Austria. And then, of course, you have people like Solomon de Rothschild, the grandson of the founder of the dynasty, but you have then many others from families who are apparently Catholic, but in reality they're not. Then they created their own branch of the Illuminati, the Asiatic Brethren, in which at that point they could bring their own perverse form of Judaism, because it was a perverse form of Judaism. Sabbatai Zevi was not a normal rabbi. He will get his wife, who was herself, he married basically a prostitute, to sleep with anybody and make sexual magical rituals of all kinds. Same thing with Jacob Frank, who actually, in the end, even convinced his daughter, Eve Frank, to become his successor as the Shekinah. And this book will show you the connection of these families directly with the family of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. And then who brought Jeffrey Epstein to become a math professor without even having a degree in the middle of the 70s to a fancy school, to teach in a fancy school in New York? Let's see if you know that. Because that is a very important part of the development of Jeffrey Epstein's saga. It was Donald Barr, the father of the guy who was in charge of the DOJ when he was apparently found hanged in jail, no? Now, Donald Barr was a Sabbatean Frankist. Donald Barr wasn't a Catholic. He was born into a Jewish family. William Barr, who then became U.S. Attorney General at the time of Jeffrey Epstein's death, was brought up as a Catholic, but they come from Jewish roots, Sabbatean Jewish roots, from the city of Berdikiv, a major center of Hasidic Judaism. And this is very important because Hasidic Judaism is actually a reaction to the Sabbatean Frankist heresy. When in Judaism, the rabbis saw the rise of this heretical Messiah, Shabbatai Zevi, and then eventually, of course, they saw he was no good when he converted to Islam. Most of them said, okay, now this whole thing has ended, nobody's going to follow him anymore. Instead, there was still a bunch of people who outwards converted to Islam following their Messiah Shabbatai Zevi. And then later on, a century later, Jaco Frank in Saloniki, which is a very important place, also claimed he was the reincarnation of Shabbatai Zevi, but he didn't stay within the domain Turkey. He went back to Poland, Ukraine, and that's where the Frankism part of the Sabbatean Frankism starts. Donald Barr was a Sabbatean Frankist, and that's why he converted to Catholicism. Like it was a thing for Sabbatean Frankists, for people like Jacob Frank, to follow the Hedom. He called it Hedom, the way of the Hedom, to actually convert outwards to Catholicism and in secret practice. And this secret of Donald Barr, the father of William Barr, was communicated in a book that was published a year before he employed Jeffrey Epstein in the school. It's a book called Space Relations. Go and check this book on the internet. You can maybe change the image and put Donald Barr wrote a book, in fact, about sexual slavery in space that got banned at that time. And I talk about that book in my book, of course, because if you go and read that book like I did, you can see that the teachings of the Sabbatean Frankists are very relevant in that book. And so people are shocked, because then what happens? Donald Barr, the sinister plot of the space opera has even, apart from similarities with the future real-life sex crime of Jeffrey Epstein, but has even a character called Lady Morgan who indulges in acts of sadism that has been inspirational for Ghislaine Maxwell. So you understand how contorted and twisted is this whole thing. So Jeffrey Epstein is picked up, brought into by the Sabbatean Frankists as a math professor in this school, very elite school, because it's Dalton School in New York City, is an elite school. He stayed there a couple of years. He taught math and science without having a degree. And this happened a year after Donald Barr had published Space Relations, which is, if you go and read, a camouflage version of the Sabbatean Frankist perverse teachings in a sci-fi version.
Wow.
And this is the father of the guy who was the head of the DOJ. It makes them believe. Now, let's make one step forward. We go at that point, 10 years later. What happens 10 years later? 10 years later, the guy who will create later on the mega group, Lex Wexner, employs Jeffrey Epstein. He gives him a building rigged of cameras, microphones, and everything in New York City and start an operation. Now, people are like, there's always this question that goes through the journalist's mind. That's why people, my journalist colleagues, when they heard about my book, is like, wow, you're going maybe a bit too far with this one. I said, no. And Ferruccio Pinotti told me, you are inspirational for us because this is really a book that has to be written, you know. I mean, it is a risk for me to write this book. Because when you understand that everything perverted in our society, in the secret societies, and everything, is actually coming from this branch of Judaism. And there is a bunch of rabbis who don't want this to be heard, because Reform Judaism, which is the most prevalent form of Judaism today in America, was founded by disciples of the Sabbatean Frankists. So this is pretty shocking, but like I said, I think it's very important to really reveal everything we are revealing. So Lex Wexner is a guy born in 1937. He's a guy who has made a lot of money. But most of all, the mega group is the way the Sabbatean Frankists, if you go and see all the history of the people who founded the mega group in 1991, these people who are actually, people are talking about IPAC, like IPAC is the one that influences American politics. And I say, idiots, who has created IPAC? Who is influencing IPAC? And nobody knows. Well, go and check yourself. The biggest donor of IPAC is Lex Wexner.
Wow.
So you see, this book brings you to the roots of the problem in today's America. I mean, the Congress of the United States of America is controlled by IPAC, which is controlled by MEGA, which is controlled by the Sabbatean Frankist sect, which controls in turn every single banking system in the world. And it's not only the Rothschild, it's many other influential people. Like, for example, in May of this year, a guy called John Elkann went into the Oval Office with the Juventus soccer team. I don't know if you remember. And Trump said, this was a great guy from a very important dynasty. Wow. So what is this dynasty? The Elkann family is a Sabbatean Frankist family with a long history. And it goes past another of those families that, like many other Goldsmith, this and that, they all emanate from Frankfurt. And who was in Frankfurt? Jacob Frank, the Illuminati. And it's like they control everything. So it's obvious that you have to go and, 2,000 years, Jesus challenged the rabbis, okay? He had the knowledge to challenge the rabbis. 2,000 years later, people are questioning if Jesus was from a proper rabbi school. Who cares? This is not about challenging the Jewish people. This is about challenging the people who have taken over Judaism, and they have made a living hell for them. Because if today half of the world hates Israel, and there is an increased number of people who are becoming anti-Semitic, the problem is the Sabbatean Frankist. When in 1933, see, you ever heard of, I mentioned earlier, the Asiatic Brethren. And in this book, of course, you know, when you are doing an interview, it's 90 minutes. We can only scratch the surface. So I have to go through the main things, you know. Now, the way that Les Wexner and his associates work together with B'nai Brit, there is some very powerful people that, do you know the history of B'nai Brit, or do you know about B'nai Brit? Because it's very important to explain what B'nai Brit is. B'nai Brit is the one that before Jeffrey Epstein was put into place to start his operation, created the Banking and Finance Lodge, and they honored a very important guy close to Donald Trump, Roy Cohn, at the State of Israel Bond dinner in 1983. Now, this is not about, bringing disrepute into the White House or Trump. This book demonstrates that there is no president in the last century, or at least after the Second World War, but even before the Second World War, because, of course, if we go Truman, and there is, since the foundation of the State of Israel, this country is connected. And of course, even if you are a genius president that wants to renew everything, wants to create everything from scratch, and wants to detach from the past, there is no president that can avoid the power of the Sabbatean Frankists. They control you. You arrive to a level in which they will tell you, you can't go above this level. And that's why I make it very clear from the introduction of the book. You have read it because you said you read the beginning of the book. I said it very clearly. I understand we can't put the system in jeopardy. That's why we can't reveal everything about Jeffrey Epstein. But this book reveals it. So once you read this book, you understand that there is no Democrat, there's no Republican, there's no party that is free of their control. So, Michael, honestly, this system is rigged, and there's no way out of it. And this book demonstrates it fully. So, the honesty that we, as researchers, as people who have a following, and you have many people who are following you today, and I know they always follow you, and you are very honest about your endeavor and about bringing truth. We have to admit when there is a level in which you can't, they will never reveal the truth about Jeffrey Epstein, because the whole United States Congress will come and fall into pieces, and the whole executive branch, the legislative branch, the judiciary branch, they will all come crumbling down. Now, do we want that? Question.
Yes, I want it, to tell you the truth. But, I think that if this was revealed, it would be, not just the Congress and the Senate and the political system that would collapse, but it would be the banking system, everything.
When you go through my book from A to Z, and you get all the names that I'm bringing out, names that nobody talks about, of course.
Yeah.
Names that David Rockefeller defined like the biggest economist ever. And you go and check the name and say, who is this guy? I never heard about that guy. Yeah, but David Rockefeller said he was big. He must be such a big guy. Yeah, but nobody talks about it. Why? Because he's a Sabbatean Frankist. Because revealing maybe this, you see, Prime Minister Israeli said that the world is not really ruled by the people you think they're ruling the world, And there is a reason, because otherwise the system will have some very serious problems. So in my book, I really try to bring out this context of hidden people. Like, for example, if I give you a name, I'm going to give you one name here, and you tell me if you ever heard about him. André Benoit Mathieu Mayer, born in 1898, died in 1978. Have you ever heard of him?
Mm-mm.
Now, David Rockefeller defined him the most creative financial genius of our time in the investment banking world. This is what David Rockefeller said. Do you know who he was working with and who he was working for? This Sabbatean Frankist who was born, of course, and raised in a Sabatier Frankist family in Paris, ended up, after receiving the Légion d'honneur and that, coming to the United States. He then became an advisor to the Kennedy family. He also became a close confidant to President Lyndon Johnson. He was called every time they needed him at the Oval Office. He was advisor to Jackie Onassis. He was advisor to people like William S. Paley at CBS, Catherine. You see, nobody knows about him. But I told you know the names he was advising, of course. I mean, the guy was like one phone call away from the White House, close confidant of President Lyndon Johnson, of the Kennedy family in the crucial moments of American politics. And nobody knows who he is. That's how the Sabatier Frankists play everybody. They don't want to be seen. They are not the ones you see in front of the people, you know. People like Donald Buck don't want to be seen. And you see how similar the little St. James Temple of Jeffrey Epstein and the bathhouse where the Sabatier Frankists used to meet is.
So that's in Aleppo, Syria.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which was a very important base for the Sabatier Frankists, because it was also a very important commercial base. You see, for example, Anton LaVey, who founded the Church of Satan, he also had Sabatier Frankist background. You see that image. Why do you think a pope who will become a saint blesses Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell? Where did this pope come from? Poland. Where does the Sabatier Frankist come from?
There's a connection. Oh my God.
You see, and so you are basically with all these images, and then you see on top of that image of Jaco Franco with next Robert Maxwell, and they basically look at the same, because the guy thought he was the reincarnation, Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell was also a very influential figure in the intelligence services in his connections with KGB. I explained the connections of the Sabatier Frankists with the Soviet Union, how they were the only ones who were not persecuted during the time in which the Soviet Union was persecuting the Jews with Stalin. The only ones who were untouched were the Sabatier Frankists. And this is something that, I mean, I learned from my own research in Moscow with people who are Sabatier, I mean, people who actually I met, like the rabbi or the head rabbi of Moscow and stuff. And in my research, in my book, I explained. They told me, Leo, I said to them clearly, I was outside, I was in the dacha of Putin. I was guested there for one night when I was working at the Bolshoi doing this special performance. They guested me there one night, and we started to talk. And at one point, Lazar Vinogradsky, who is a dear friend of theirs, who is of course Jewish, and who lives there permanently because the wife is the head of the borders of the border police, like ICE here in the United States. And he told me, and I said to him, "How comes you have no problems?" And he said, "Well, we are treated different because we are the aristocrats." I said, "The aristocrats." And then I thought about it. Jacob Frank nobilitated these people to think of themselves as superior, as aristocrats, not as other Jews. The other Jews are the ones they sent to the concentration camps. They sent to some remote area in Siberia to die. So you see that the persecution is then very direct. It's not like simply the worst enemy of the Jew is the Jew. The worst enemy of the Jew is actually a Jew who's going to send you to a concentration camp or to some kind of gulag, because they don't care about you. And why they don't care about you? Because the Sabbatean Frankists, once they brought forward this heresy, whoever didn't agree with them was their enemy. Even if they were Jewish, they didn't care. Actually, if you were Jewish and you were not embracing this heresy, you were, for them, even more cursed than any other. And so you deserve
a lot of the Sabbatean Franks came from Ukraine, Polish area.
Yes,
yes. They're the ones that basically took down the royal family in Russia.
Okay. First of all, the Sabbateans came from all over before Sabbatai Zevi made his conversion in 1666. That was the year zero, the millennium year of when he converted to Islam. At that point, the Dome, the Sabbateans, became in charge of a place which is now known as Thessaloniki. You know Thessaloniki? It's like in today's Thessaloniki is Salonika. How you call it? Thessaloniki is let me explain it for the people who maybe don't know a little bit about geography. It's a city in northern Greece, but it was also part of the Ottoman Empire. And it was a very important city that gave birth to some of the most influential banking and merchant families of the Jewish cartel. Wow. And that and Thessaloniki became the breeding ground for this heresy. Jacob Frank was brought there when he was a child, and he converted. But first of all, I want to also tell people who are following us, if you think that Zionism was born in Israel, or born before, of course, Israel, because they then brought the people to Israel with people like Theodor Herzl finding the international Zionist movement, you are completely wrong. You know where Zionism was founded? It was founded in England by the Puritans, the same Puritans that came here with the Mayflower.
Oh my God.
And you know that the father of Sabbatai Zevi was Mordecai Zevi, working in Smyrna for the Puritans at the time of Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell led the Jews back to England after a few centuries they had been kicked out. Well, Oliver Cromwell led the Jews back after he made a deal with this very important Jewish figure who himself was connected to Mordecai Zevi, who was the father of Sabbatai Zevi. So when Sabbatai Zevi launched the idea of all the Jewish tribes going back to Israel, who do you think gave them that idea?
So Oliver Cromwell also took down the English monarchy.
Okay, for those, of course, that is
these guys just come out after the monarchies left and right.
It's very interesting, this whole story, because then you go all the way from all this, and then you come to Prince Andrew, and then you say, what was Prince Andrew grieving the Royal Lodge to Wednesday, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell? Why is all this happening? Why is now the monarchy having a real big problem in England that might bring the whole Windsor family to collapse?
Disappearing.
Well, people need to understand that the Rothschild were or not nobilitated in England also? They were. They were nobilitated in Vienna. They were nobilitated in England. They were nobilitated, and they nobilitated and then married with Christians. And that is something that only the Sabbatean Frankists will do, because they didn't give a damn about their Jewish roots or their Jewish faith. So it's very important here for people to really realize, I mean, Oliver Cromwell, you are mentioning a very important figure, because Oliver Cromwell basically was in charge of England after a civil war that brought to the beheading of a king.
Yeah.
You know, it was a unique thing in I guess, in English history, that now the leadership of Oliver Cromwell met with a guy called Menasse ben Israel. Menasse ben Israel was connected to Mordecai Zevi. And all this is connected. And who was, and why did these Puritans, and of course, including the ones that then went on the Mayflower, came here, made the history of this beautiful country we now live in. So we have to be very careful here. But the thing is that it's all interconnected, because Menasse ben Israel convinced, he was, together with these Oliver Cromwell's representatives, sent their delegates to Menasse ben Israel, who was a very important figure. And Menasse ben Israel had been studying the work of a prominent Jewish French-born figure called Isaac Laprière. And this guy was a Marranos. Marranos are those Jews who were forced to convert to Catholicism, but were continuing to practice Judaism. This even before the Sabbatean Frankists, okay? Now, this is with Isaac and with these people. It's important to mention these people because Sabbatai Zevi wasn't simply a product of Judaism. Sabbatai Zevi was a product of Judaism, but also of the Puritans that worked together with the idea that this guy, Menasse ben Israel, had was, first of all, to convince Oliver Cromwell to bring back the Jews into England, which he managed, but only as a let's say, temporary phase before sending them back to Israel. These are the roots of Zionism. And the Puritans were very much into bringing the Jews, but not necessarily because they liked the Jews. But in the end, the Zionism, which will develop, of course, as we know it later on, also, I mean, further, but the roots are there. And the roots are that we bring them back simply because we need them in order for the Messiah to come back and to arrive to the end times and to the scriptures to manifest. That's it. It's not like it's Oliver Cromwell executes King Charles, and then you have, of course, later on, Oliver Cromwell will be passing on to his son, but that will briefly last, and then they will go back into the monarchy. So that was a brief experiment, but still, the Jews were reaccepted into England.
Came back in, yeah.
Yes.
So were they the funders of the British or English Civil War?
No, what happened was this, that the anticipation of Jews returning to Palestine and making it their national homeland was first heard among self-identified Christian groups in the 1580s, the Puritans. They were the first ones who wanted to bring back, not the Jews. The Jews didn't even have an idea about it at that point. But then the whole thing developed with, of course, the help of Menasse ben Israel, with the help of other Jews that were like-minded, and that was the basis of what we are calling Zionism. Were these Jews probably also very rich and probably financed Cromwell? Possibly. But there is another important thing here, Michael, that the father of Sabbatai Zevi, who will declare himself Messiah, he started to work for them and became the representative in Smyrna in Turkey. And so when Sabbatai Zevi was born, he was given by his father these ideas of the Jews going back to Israel, of a Messiah that was required to manifest this whole thing. And so he said, okay, I'm going to be that Messiah. Let me declare myself Messiah. Understand? Now, when you these days talk to the Jews about these things, not, I mean, these are very delicate matters within Judaism, because you're talking about the links that go way back hundreds of years, and these links are not always of the best kind. okay? Because for them, Manasseh ben Israel, who got them to actually go back into England, was known throughout Europe as the ambassador of the Jews. The fact that he was inspirational, though, to the first Sabbateans was then proven by the fact that people close to Oliver Cromwell, when Sabbatai Zevi finally declared themselves Messiah, they immediately jumped on board. So there is historical evidence. It's not like I'm making things up here. Everything has historical evidence that I'm talking about and very credible sources. Now, at the same time, Sadler, who was the Cromwell's secretary, was so inspired by the whole thing that he created what is known as British Israelism. You know what British Israelism is? Maybe I have a book here that is actually a very historical book that I should show you. He built the belief that the English were the lost tribe of Israel. Now, this is one of these very rare books about British Israel that was very popular back in the days, you see? The Saxon race as a lost tribe of Israel.
Wow.
Now, and this is an original book from, I think, 1880. I don't have my glasses with me. Yeah, I have them. But yes, here. This book, I think, is from... because British Israelism became very popular until, of course, with DNA, with modern DNA, things got... this is like from 1889, I think. See?
Wow.
Now, and this copy, by the way, is even more rare copy because it's from the library of a very famous guy who was Alfred Korzybski, another guy, very important guy. I have my rare books, so you know that I'm like very fond of my rare books. So, but British Israelism became inspirational, especially within Freemasonry. Up until still now, there is British Freemasons and Rosicrucians who believe that England is the lost tribe of Israel. This gives an extra amount of confidence. And of course, we have to understand the importance that England has in the constitution of modern Israel, because before Israel was founded, who was in charge? England. And before them, the Ottoman Empire, which they, of course, sabotaged left, right, and center in order, and it was the actual Sabbateans, the Domme. You see, you said that the Jacob Frank, of course, you are very right when you say Frankism was developed in Ukraine, in Austria, in Poland, in all those parts in Europe, no? But then you have the Domme, who became more integrated in the course of time, who were in Turkey, in Syria, in the Middle East. Now, the Jews are divided in Sephardi Jews and Ashkenazi. The Ashkenazi are prevalently European. The Sephardi Jews are prevalently Middle Eastern in nature. In fact, you see them also from the way they look. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now, when Theodor Herzl went to create the Zionist movement, which then will bring the creation of Israel later on with the Balfour Declaration and then all the rest, he found himself with a very divided people, because they were, thanks to the Sabbatean Frankists, there was an increasing number of Jews who were secularized, who didn't want to have anything to do with the Hasidic Jews or with the Sephardi Jews who were kind of like, they would see. I mean, there were people who were highly insultive of their own people. Franz Kafka, you know, Franz Kafka, of course, is a very important figure. He was of Jewish origin, but he himself once, Franz Kafka, everybody knows as a writer, you know, Franz Kafka is one of the greatest, I think, in the German language, Jewish novelist born in Prague that everybody knows. But he wrote that after watching a ritual of Hasidic Jews, he wrote that these people are like primitive, tribal, they are like Africans or something like that. He said something really racist against the Jews who were still practicing Judaism in the traditional form. So there was a big divide between the more secularized Jews. The Illuminati had made the Jews more secularized, the ones that converted, the ones who became less and less religious, the ones that, you know, I explained the birth of Reform Judaism, I explained the birth of liberal. I also explained the birth of the two factions that today rule Israel. Today, Israel is ruled by what used to be the labor Zionist, now it's the Democratic Party, the one that was in the hands of Ehud Barak, who brutally raped Virginia Giuffre in Little St. James, just to give you an idea. Brutally raped St. James, Virginia Giuffre in Little St. James. In that temple we saw.
Right, wow.
And then you have on the other side what is known as the more conservative forces of Judaism. But both the conservative, let me explain you this. The rabbis who understood what was happening with the Sabbatean Frankists and understood that this also these political movements were in their hands, both the conservative ones as well as the leftist ones, denounced this over and over again. They said, Judaism can be only one, and it's the one that follows the Mosaic laws, the ones that, you know, were delivered to Moses, and we respect. We respect the Torah in its traditional form. We respect Judaism the way it was given to us. Anything that comes, you know, like that is in some way being brought out of that realm is in itself wrong for traditional Jews. Now, what happens is that there were figures like, for example, Zev Jabotinsky. Have you ever heard of this guy? Zev Jabotinsky is a very important guy within Judaism because this guy, Vladimir Zev Jabotinsky, is the guy who created the revisionist Zionist movement, which is today the father of the Likud party, which is the one of Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, the same people who created the Likud party on the right, the Sabbatean Frankists created both the right and the left. So they're all played. There is, like my friend, late friend, is no longer alive, Barry Kamish, used to say, it is the Sabbatean state of Israel. It was created that way. The guy who created it, this guy, this is the Encyclopedia of Zionism, you see?
Yep.
This guy here, who created the whole thing, was this guy here, a journalist, Theodor Herzl, is considered the father of Zionism, and for this reason is considered to be, you know, very important to the whole foundation of Israel. Well, he died before Israel was founded, but what he did was to reunite, to put together those factions of ultra-religious together with the more socialist, leftist, or less religious factions. You see, he had to, like I said earlier, there was a lot of racism between Jews. That racism between Jews was then played later on by the Nazis, because when we see, for example, the typical image of the Jew with the nose, the finger, you know, the classic guy who, you know, like this, well, that was played by the Jews themselves. Theodor Herzl said, and this is stated in his own memoirs, that the best friends for the Jewish cause will be the anti-Semitic people, the anti-Semitic nations, the nations who persecute the Jews will be actually the best friends of the Jews in the making of Israel. He was understanding that by the persecution of the Jews will unite and then they will be brought to Israel. And that's what happened. The Jews were persecuted in Russia, and basically in the early 1905, there was, we had earlier also other pogroms. Russia was persecution. Then you have, of course, the Holocaust. And you have, but Adolf Hitler, and that's why everything I state in my new book is from Jewish sources, so they can't come to me and say, Leo, you're an anti-Semite, because it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. I'm going to show you now a couple of documents of great importance for your audience that maybe if I have the possibility, I want to show you here, or at least I think they are very important. Let me show you something here, very, very, very important. You have that, and now I'm going to show you, just a second, here. Now this image, and you will say, what is this image? This image might not mean anything to normal people, but this image is very important. This is Rabbi Marvin Alterman in the middle, presiding as Chief Justice of a court of 5 members from his Supreme Rabbinical Court, convened in 1976 to excommunicate Henry Kissinger as a Sabbatean Frankist.
Wow.
Henry Kissinger went to Israel and asked, the first thing he asked, you know what it was? A sandwich with pork. But that is nothing. Henry Kissinger was, as we all know, a member of what club? The Bohemian Club. And in my book, I have a whole chapter showing you the roots of the Bohemian Club in Prague and in the Sabbatean Frankist Lodge of the Asiatic Brethren, with receipts and academic sources certified. The Bohemian Club was founded by the Sabbatean Frankists.
Wow.
So this is one document one thing that I think was important, but now I want to show you another one that might be of importance. And I repeat, this is very important because people will understand things with when they see. Let me take this off here, and so let me see if I can put it. Let's go back to this. Okay, this is Lex Wexner, the guy who everybody says, how comes he gave the power of attorney to Jeffrey? How is it possible? He gave his own building, the most expensive and luxurious building in New York City, to this guy. What's behind it? Well, Lex Wexner, who later became in charge of the mega group, is a Sabbatean Frankist. That is, by the way, what you see here, another dedication to Jeffrey for his birthday. We know he liked that kind of style.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave everything to Jeffrey because Jeffrey was working for him. That's it. Was working not only for him. It's not only a Mossad operation. There was involved Shin Bet, Mossad. There was involved Prime Minister of Israel. But it's not only Israel. This whole operation, that blackmailing operation by using these young women, and of course, the fact that they practice sexual deviance is a classical thing within Sabbatean Frankism. So it's not a novelty of sorts. And now I'm going to show you something else. the guy who founded the Ordo Templi Orientis, which today is the organization that, as you know, is the owner of the copyright of Aleister Crowley's writings, and also the secret society that has infiltrated Freemasonry to a great extent, was this gentleman here. And where was he from? He was from Vienna. And in the foundation documents of this new organization, he actually, and this is not a secret because it's in the foundation documents of this organization, he, and it's quite incredible, but he states that the ones that expired him, this guy is called Karl Kerner, is the co-founder of the Ordo Templi Orientis, okay? Just for those who don't know it. Later on, 10 years after the founding, Aleister Crowley, a few years actually after the founding, not even 10 years, Aleister Crowley got approached by Theodor Reuss, the other co-founder, who was also co-founder of the new Illuminati in Germany. He was, in his foundation documents, he said that he was basically inspired and was connected to the Asiatic Brethren, to the Frater Lucis, the Illuminati, who were the ones founded by the cousin of Jacob Frank, Moses Dobruska. So the whole sexual magical Academia Masonica that the Illuminati created there in Vienna was created by the same people who also inspired the Bohemian Club, the Asiatic Brethren, of Moses Dobruska. And Moses Dobruska, who went by various names, by the way, you can find them on Wikipedia. You can put Moses Dobruska, and you will see he has like maybe 3 or 4 names that we know of. Moses Dobruska is a very important guy. So this was the founder of the OTO, okay? While instead, another guy of great importance for our story is Moses Dobruska, because Moses Dobruska, and we can see it very easily, was related directly to Jacob Frank, and not only to Jacob Frank. Watch. Moses Dobruska. Okay. Now, you see, his mother was the first cousin of Jacob Frank, who the reincarnation of the self-proclaimed Zavadai Zevi. Then we go here, and it says, he went also by the name Julius Frey. He was one of the main activists of the Lodge Knights of the St. John Evangelist of Europe. This is the name of the Asiatic Brethren. Read. So that, I mean, it's like we are not making conspiracies here. This is historical evidence. Everything is asserted by historical evidence. And the grandfather, but the thing that people don't know is that the most inspirational text for the Sabbatean Frankists, the text that inspired them in their heresies and so on, was written by the grandfather of Moses Dobruska, who was a guy called Rabbi Eshebutz. And now I'm going to show you this guy, because this guy brings us directly to the biggest controversy in Judaism, at the heart of Judaism. And here is when you have to really be careful, because the Jews, they are kind of like a little particular about their history. Okay? So, Jonathan, this guy here, okay, is particularly influential because he wrote the most influential book on Sabbatai Zevi and their practices, their heretical practices. And as you see here, it says, H. Boots was a Talmudist, Halachist, Kabbalist, first as Dayan of Prague and later as Rabbi of the Free Communities. That is a big title for the Jews, okay? But then it says here, conflict with Jacob Emden and the Emden-Ashwood controversy. You just go down here and you see the Ashkenazi issued a ban excommunication of the Sabbateans. And he was accused of being a Sabbatean. But in my book, I also bring you the evidence, because he was the author of this book called Come This Day Unto the Fountain. And that is the most important book ever for the Sabbatean Frankists to this day. And it's not any kind of book. It's a book where basically King David goes on a mountain and he gets into an homosexual act. So it's pretty far out stuff. I mean, by Jewish standards, you are talking about King David and you're placing him on a mountain, and instead of meeting with his friend, the official version is that King David receives a spy because his son had, waged war against him and all that. This is the history of Israel we are talking about. In the version they give, he gets in an homosexual act with this guy to make sexual magic with God. I mean, it's like Aleister Crowley all over again, if you think about it. In fact, Aleister Crowley was inspired by these people. And
Wow.
we have the direct connections of it. And not only this one, these other connections. In my book, I talk about the mentor of Madame Blavatsky, Max Theon, another Polish Sabbatean Frankist. I talk about Ignaz Trebisch Lincoln. Have you ever heard of Ignaz Trebisch Lincoln? This is a character that you need to know about, because this guy, I find this character fascinating, because people don't know anything about them, but they have made the history of mankind behind the scenes. Now, Ignaz Trebisch Lincoln, I want to show you this guy, because this guy went from being a Sabbatean Frankist, an Anglican priest, a Nazi spy, a Chinese habot, a Japanese, all in one life. Okay, and this is a typical example of a Sabbatean man of mystery, like Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell. It's not like a unique thing to Robert Maxwell or to Jeffrey Epstein. These characters existed, and not only they existed, they claim to reincarnate. So I'm going to show you now this guy, because this guy has a history. He even got elected, and he wasn't even English, to the English Parliament. Okay, this is one of the images of Trebisch Lincoln.
So this is kind of interesting, because, we think about Jeffrey Epstein as being a Mossad spy and a CIA spy, and
that is secondary.
He's a Sabbatean. It sounds like they're they can transition because they're Sabbatean. They can do it all.
What?
Like this guy.
This is a Sabbatean. What does it say there? It says Trebisch Lincoln as Chao Kung.
Chao Kung.
Yes. What the heck? And not only.
He's got a serious face on too.
What's here? The chief of Gestapo in the Far East, SS Colin Joseph urged this at the scheme received. He proclaimed himself also as the new Dalai Lama, but this was only the second part of his life. He had another part of his life in which he actually met Adolf Hitler, and he was in his capacity, he met Adolf Hitler, and he actually was involved in the coup that brought Hitler to power after.
Wow.
And before that, he was actually before that, he was in the SRIA in England. He was involved with the Bishop of Canterbury, and he was an Anglican priest in England. And not only that, you see here, Anglican, Church of England. And on top of that, he was also elected in England he became a representative of the English Parliament, a liberal candidate. I mean, you can't make these things up. I mean, these people are, beyond the fact that they are evil, they are geniuses of evil. And because they're international men of mystery, spies, do everything and anything. They are everything and the contrary of everything. In the end, this guy, Trebisch Lincoln, got killed while he was a habot, simply because he threatened Hitler to reveal the truth about him. And so the Japanese who were occupying that part of China, they had him killed. You can't threaten Hitler during the Second World War. He was very powerful. And this guy had the courage to threaten Adolf Hitler. And he was a Sabbatean prank. And Adolf Hitler, like my book reveals, for those who don't know, and these are not my words, of course, because otherwise the Jews would say, Rabbi Margan. Adolf Hitler was conceived in 1888 in a Sabbatean Frankist ritual. That's it.
Wow. So these guys, if you go against them, you like you talk about in your introduction, there's like dozens of people that have mysteriously died. The latest, Virginia Giuffre. So she committed suicide. We know she didn't commit suicide.
Yeah, sure, she committed. Yeah. Okay, so everybody commits suicide. By the way, I'm alive and kicking. I'm not committing suicide. Just so you know, everybody knows.
You need a bodyguard, yeah, but I don't know if I could save you. So, geez.
No, the thing is this, let's say this. I have been within this world, and that's why I'm bringing you out this truth, okay? I know how deep it goes. They know who I am and how, let's say, fearless I am. But in the end, life, it's, I'm not afraid of death. That is the main thing. Okay, let's make it
another thing that keeps you kicking too is because you're constantly revealing. I've learned that.
Yes. Also, maybe, I have a few connections. My cousin was the bodyguard, best friend of Henry Kissinger.
Okay, there you go. You're in the family. You're good.
But let's say that what I revealed has never really gone very well for them. I mean, they are like, oh, what a bad boy. He should stop saying these things. Why doesn't he mind his own business? I remember that time when, and I have a video, but I think they closed down the channel, maybe also for that video. I just got the black book of Jeffrey Epstein, and I called Prince Andrew. He answered me.
Wow. Jeez.
But you see, I think one thing here is very clear from this book. Nobody can be above them. And so for this reason, we are just like 2,000 years ago. And anybody who's going to try to go about, to stop them or challenge them will be crucified. That's why I know that Donald J. Trump is not suicidal. And that's why I know that he's like, okay, let's get this thing. You're still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? Yes, we are still talking about Jeffrey Epstein, the president. But what can you do? That's how it is. Right. We are in the year 2025. You can't just simply put this truth under the carpet and hope that it goes away.
Well, your book is definitely going to help us see this information, but like you said, no one can be above them, or no one can suppress them, because they will suppress you. So you can know them for their misdeeds and so forth, but you can't do anything about it. Sounds like.
Well, when you go through all the, like B'nai Brit. Maybe we can end by talking about B'nai Brit, because I think B'nai Brit they're the founders of the Anti-Defamation League. So they are the ones who really control the narrative here, no? Mm-hmm. So B'nai Brit is something that we should maybe discuss before the end of this show, because the foundation of B'nai Brit, it's, apart from the fact that the words B'nai Brit, what does it mean? When you go through the real meaning of it, and Rabbi Anterman was very, very careful about, he said, it means Sabbatai is my illumination. Now, the B'nai Brit is the most powerful organization, in Jewish Masonic organization in the world. There is no other organization like B'nai Brit. And B'nai Brit is the one that, of course, some people might fear, because they are committed to the security and continuity of the Jewish people and the state of Israel and combating anti-Semitism. But I made it very clear here. B'nai Brit was founded by German Jews who, after the experience of the Asiatic Brethren, German Freemasonry didn't want to welcome the Jews in their lodges. There were certain lodges who in the end ended up under the obedience of the United Grand Lodge of England, because they couldn't find any lodges in Germany that would let Jews in. There was a lot of racism against Jews, and this is very bad. There was a lot of anti-Semitism. So they came to New York, and in October 1843, they founded this organization. It was 12 of them, a bit, I think they wanted to create something where the Jews could join and not feel left out. The problem is that all these organizations, including B'nai Brit, and what happened with the Reform Judaism and with Liberal Judaism, is that they are basically deciding which of the Mosaic laws they can obey and which they can disregard. And I would like to remind those Jews that Moses will kick their asses from here to Mount Sinai. Either you obey them or you disregard them altogether. There is no compromise. Oh, this one yes, this one no. Maybe we can, And when when you see like the terrible acts that were committed by these powerful people, and Jeffrey Epstein was constructed by these people, was a construct of these people. He wasn't the ultimate, supreme manipulator. He was the guy. Was also a scientist, a mathematician of sorts, an expert on AI of the ultimate kind. He was a friend of Peter Thiel. And Peter Thiel comes from his family from Frankfurt, even if he's Christian, with an old link to the Sabbatean Frankists.
Thiel, it's Sabbatean Frankists too?
He is from a family in Frankfurt.
Wow. Okay, that explains a lot too. Wow, he's like bombshells tonight. Oh my God.
Well, I mean, if you read this book, it's one bombshell after the other. So at the end of the book, you're like, oh my God. So I hope that this book continues.
I hope I get to write another book. Yeah.
but I think that the idea is that Jeffrey Epstein was also a mad scientist. So the concept of the Frankenstein comes from the concept of the golem. And I start my book actually talking about the golem concept in Judaism, which was this creature created with these magical formulas within Judaism. You see it there. No, go back to see there on the left. That is go on the left there. That is the creation, the original creation by the rabbi in Prague, the rabbi who actually created the golem. And the golem was created in reality to defend the Jewish community. And the golem was the inspiration for then creating.
complements her book.
It complements absolutely my book because that's
I'll have to get it too. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that is the testimony firsthand. She didn't give the names, but the names, like her ghostwriter said, are very easily. She had made some testimonies that were deposited and that you can find on Google very easily. Ehud Barak, for example, is the prime minister she talked about that violently raped her. You don't have it written on the book simply because she wanted to avoid legal challenges, but because she deposited the testimony with the FBI, I think there is no problem in going and getting those testimonies. I mean, in the end, we are all expecting these Epstein files to be revealed, but I said from the start, they will never be fully revealed. But a lot of what has already been revealed, if you start summing 1 + 1 = 2, gives you the result that you get what you want if you start searching. But of course, nobody could offer you what I offered in this book, which is a religious, cultural, anthropological background of all the characters. So you finally realize, oh, wow, this guy came from this family. This other guy comes from this family. This other guy comes from this family. What is Steven Spielberg doing with Les Wexner in a secret meeting? What are they doing behind the scenes? B'nai Brit created not only a financial lodge, created a number of lodges in Hollywood. They directed the narrative of Hollywood. The Sabbatean Frankists, as you know, which I exposed in volume 8 of my Confessions, have directed since the beginning the narrative of Hollywood. So I think that I hope, I know, listen, Michael, I want to be very sincere. You are the only guy who's giving me the possibility of talking about my book. Up until now, very few people are having the courage to invite me on the shows.
I didn't know at first. Now I'm committed now, I guess, but no, I love your work, and I love exposing this information. Yeah, we've talked about this in some of your other work, and this is more comprehensive, obviously. It puts it all together. Wow. And we didn't really go down some of the dark roads. I kind of alluded to some of them, but it's probably better we don't go down them.
You can find them on the book. You
start to read this book, guys. You're going to see some crazy stuff. Now, somebody in the chat said that the Sophia robot looks like Virginia, and I agree. When Virginia was a little girl, was basically 12 years old, or however old she was when Jeffrey Epstein was sporting her around.
It's possible, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. The fact that after, when the robot was launched in 2016, they publicly said, it doesn't have nothing to do with it. But then, the evidence is there. He founded the AI for the actual, software for the robot. And he had announced the birth of Sophia the robot 3 years before it was announced publicly with the name Sophia. So, Hanson Robotics is also, really typical of those people who, like I said in my book, once Epstein was suddenly compromised, they soon, deflected and said, oh, we don't know him, we don't want to, but the truth is there. In this day and age, you can't escape the information background behind Epstein and all the links. They are there and they are proven already. And like I said, I think it's complementary to the work of Virginia, because Virginia has been a victim. And of course, she's been eliminated. And I'm convinced that she's been suicided, just like everybody else. And aside from, Jean-Luc Brunel, who gave him more than 1,000 girls, aside from Ghislaine Maxwell and himself, nobody else has been arrested. And that really explains you the power of these people. They are above the law. And it's really sad that the whole of the Western world, the judiciary, is compromised.
Wow. Stunning work, Leo. And thanks so much for coming out and revealing this. Because so many people have been stuck on this. Why? And this, you've answered it to a great extent.
Yeah, once the question was always reoccurring for years, and it's always like the journalist that usually does this kind of work is always like, oh well, but then there is the intelligence involved, there is elite people involved, and we cannot really understand what they are doing. And so, it always kind of stops.